Journey to Jesus. Session 4. Terrorists strike capital city. Bombing rocks marketplace. Riots a symptom of unrest. These attention-grabbing headlines are always coming to us out of the Islamic world. But is that all there is to Muslims? In this presentation, we'll discover that Muslims are much more complex than the headlines portray, and we'll learn how to share our faith within the remarkable diversity of Islamic cultures. Global forces such as industrialization, modernization, and globalization have created an identity crisis within the Muslim world. As Muslims wrestle with these influences, they are confronted with issues that do not have historical Islamic solutions. These crises, because of modernization, have resulted in a variety of responses within Islam. Islamic responses to these global forces range from political solutions to purely religious ones, from secular reactions to spiritual responses. This range has resulted in many types of Muslims. The following categories tend to be broad, and many Muslims fall into more than one of these categories, depending on where they live and what their values are. Nonetheless, these categories are helpful for understanding the tremendous diversity that exists in the Islamic world. For the purposes of this presentation, we'll explore 9 categories of Muslims. The first category of Muslims we will consider are the fundamentalists, or Islamists. When it comes to Islam, fundamental Muslims are the most popular subject of mainstream media. These Muslims pursue a socio-political solution to industrialization, modernization, and globalization, and are more likely than other Muslim groups to take up arms to achieve their political goals. Muslim majority societies have often sought to suppress fundamentalist groups through cruel and unusual punishment. Other Muslims are Puritans. Although they didn't arrive on the Mayflower, Puritans yearned to return to the 7th century religion of their prophet Muhammad. They interpret the Quran and other Islamic sources literally and oppose Muslims who revere saints or practice mysticism. They believe these groups have corrupted the pure message of Islam that existed during Muhammad's time. Some Muslims are traditionalists. Traditionalists look to works by Islamic jurists of the 12th century or earlier for their interpretation of Islam. They reject reform or any attempt to reconcile Islam with the modern world. This group dominates the seminaries of the Islamic world. Some Muslims are ijtihadists or modernists. Ijtihadists want Islam to step into the 21st century. They believe that Islamic law needs to be reinterpreted in light of modern life. They want to show that Islam is relevant in today's world. This group is calling for reforms in Islam, but they often lack the voice within traditional Islamic society to be heard. Some Muslims are secularists. Secular Muslims, like their Western counterparts, believe that religion has little to no place in the public arena. Religious beliefs are to be kept private, and secular democracies should operate free from the influence of religion. Secular Muslims are very vocal against the atrocities committed in the name of Islam. Another category of Muslims are African American Muslims. African American Muslims generally fall into one of two groups: Sunni Muslims and the Nation of Islam. Black Sunni Muslims are Orthodox Muslims who want to get back to the presumed Islamic religion of their African ancestors. These Sunni Muslims are not to be confused with the Nation of Islam. The Nation of Islam is a group that is deemed heretical by other Muslims. The Nation of Islam believes that God was once a man, that there was a prophet who came after Muhammad, and that blacks are superior to people of other ethnicities. Ironically, the impact of the Christian church on African American Muslims shapes their understanding of Islam. According to Richard Brent Turner, most of the African Americans who have become leaders in the Nation of Islam, and many black Sunni Muslims, are from a church background. Other Muslims are mystic or Sufi Muslims, who focus on inner spirituality and experience. They compose poems and songs about their longings to experience the love of God. Some repeat the name of God until they enter a trance-like state where they believe they can commune with the divine. Some Muslims are refugees. Refugees are people who have fled their home countries when faced with terrible hardships such as war, famine, poverty, or natural disasters. They are very transient, often moving to places or jobs that they think will better their situations. Due to past abuses and hardships, it can be very hard for them to form relationships of trust. Over 80% of Muslims are folk or popular Muslims. Folk Islam flavors most branches of Islam. This strand of Islam focuses on the use of magic, charms, and amulets to ward off and manipulate the spirit world that influences Muslims' daily lives. It is popularly believed that folk Islam is created by joining Islam with traditional religions. However, support for the use of magic is found in the Quran and Hadith. The fault lines in the Muslim world are beginning to show, and they are shaking the foundations of Islam. In this dark time in Islamic history, we as Christians must be true and compassionate ministers of the gospel to Muslims, ready and able to step into the breach and proclaim Christ as the answer. Now that you've learned more about different types of Muslims, take about 5 minutes to discuss this question as a group. Which categories of Muslims have you met in person, read about, or seen in the media? How do these categories expand your understanding of Muslims worldwide? Once you're finished discussing these ideas, please resume the video. Pause the presentation here. Before we continue to the next portion of this session, take 5 minutes to discuss this last question with your group. Choose one of the categories of Muslims mentioned in this video. How would you reach out to this particular type of Muslim with the love of Christ? Once you are finished discussing this, please resume the video. As we respond to Muslims in this chaotic environment, we as Christians must maintain our identity as the loving body of Christ. This means not only sharing our faith with our Muslim neighbors, but also loving them in tangible ways. One way we can do this is by receiving and caring for those who are victims of violence, whether they be refugees or other Muslims who have been displaced. We need to pray for our Muslim neighbors, that Jesus would reveal himself and reach into their hearts. As we love our Muslim neighbors, we must be careful not to reduce Islam or Muslims to an ideology we can attack. Instead, we should focus on loving them and sharing Christ with those who are willing to listen.